I heard Diane's sedan crunch across the gravel of our driveway, long before her knuckles hit the front door. I was standing by the kitchen counter, wiping down a streak of juice Mia had spilled that morning, my shoulders tight enough to ache. For 28 days I had been holding this fragile illusion together for my 2 kids. I told 7-year-old Mia and 5-year-old Jax that their dad was staying somewhere else for work, that he would call most evenings, that everything would smooth out soon. I had not breathed a single word of the truth to Diane. She had planned this visit weeks ago, booked 3 nights in our guest room, and driven 2 hours from her small town outside Macon, purely to see her grandchildren. She had no idea her son Ethan had walked out on us for a woman from his sales department. I pulled the front door open, forcing a soft, practiced smile onto my face. Diane stood on the porch hauling a large canvas tote slung over one arm, a paper bag stuffed with coloring books and gummy snacks dangling from her other hand. Her silver-streaked brown hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore the faded knit cardigan she always brought for cooler autumn afternoons in Atlanta's suburbs. "Hi, honey," she said, stepping forward for a quick hug, her car keys clinking in her palm. "Where are my babies? I cannot wait to squeeze them." But the second she crossed over our threshold, her whole posture shifted. Her smile faded slow, like someone turning down a lamp. Her gaze swept the entryway, landing on the empty hook by the coat rack where Ethan's leather work jacket used to hang. There were no men's boots lined up beside the kids' sneakers anymore. No briefcase sat by the staircase. The house smelled like kid-friendly vanilla candle instead of the cedar cologne Ethan wore every single day. The normal loud hum of our household was missing. There was no faint basketball game playing on the living room television, no half-empty coffee mug left sitting on the console table. Mia came darting down the hallway then, Jax hot on her heels, both of them screaming for their grandma. Diane knelt at once to wrap them in a big embrace, her face softening for the children, but I caught the way her eyes kept drifting around the room over their small shoulders. She was searching for Ethan. After she had kissed both kids' foreheads and sent them running toward the toy room with their new coloring supplies, she straightened up and glanced back toward me. "Where is Ethan?" she asked, her voice low, careful so the children would not overhear from down the hall. "He texted me yesterday saying he would be home this afternoon. I thought we would all get dinner together." My throat went dry. I had rehearsed half-truths in my head for days, ways to dance around the subject without blowing everything apart in front of her. But standing there beneath my own ceiling, watching the quiet suspicion settle across her features, I realized there was no gentle way to deliver this. I gestured toward the kitchen, and we stepped past the dining table chairs, stopping beside the granite countertop where I had been cleaning earlier. The distant sound of kids laughing echoed from the playroom. "He is not living here anymore, Diane," I said quietly. My hands trembled slightly against the cool counter surface. "He left almost 4 weeks ago. He's with another woman, a co-worker from his office." Complete silence fell between us. Her jaw tightened, and she took a small step backward like I had physically pushed her. All of her pre-visit excitement drained right out of her face. For a long moment she just stared at me, like she could not quite process the words that had come out of my mouth. I watched her eyes glisten, and I could not tell if she was angry at me, heartbroken for her grandchildren, or already defensive of her son. "That cannot be right," she said finally, her voice tight. "Ethan would not just walk away from his family. There has to be more to this story." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed once on the counter. A text popped up on the screen, visible to both of us. It was from Ethan. He was checking in, asking whether his mother had arrived safely at the house. He had not included a single question about Mia or Jax. He had not asked how I was holding up. Diane's gaze locked onto that message, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. The polite, pretense-driven family mask we had both worn for years lay completely shattered on the floor between us. I stood there breathing shallow, realizing I had no clue which direction this would turn. I did not know if I was talking to an ally who would grieve alongside me, or another person I would now have to fight against inside my own home. The rest of that late autumn afternoon unfolded in heavy, strained quiet. Diane did not raise her voice. She did not storm out the front door, yet every small movement carried unspoken tension. She laughed for the kids, helped Jax assemble a plastic dinosaur puzzle, sat cross-legged on the playroom carpet while Mia showed off every drawing taped to our wall. But whenever the children turned their backs, her expression hardened again, like she was replaying everything I had told her in her head. I could feel her weighing every possibility, trying to find some explanation that would let her son come out looking less cruel. I kept myself busy with dinner, chopping vegetables at the kitchen island, listening to the faint clatter of toys from down the hall. Part of me hoped she would pull me aside and say she was sorry, that she could not believe Ethan would do this to us. Another quieter, more realistic part braced for her to make excuses for him. After dinner, once Mia and Jax were settled in front of a cartoon show, Diane pulled out a dining room chair and sat across from me, her hands folded tight in her lap. I still cannot wrap my mind around this, she began, keeping her voice low so the children would not overhear. Ethan has always cared about this family. Maybe the two of you went through a rough patch. People make mistakes in marriages. That does not mean he would throw everything away overnight. My chest tightened. I had expected this. I had spent years watching her overlook Ethan's flaws, brushing off his selfish choices as stress from work or simple male carelessness. This was not a rough patch, I told her. He had been seeing this woman for months. He packed his bags and drove away without a real conversation. He barely calls the kids most nights. Diane's phone vibrated on the wooden table between us. Her eyes flicked down, and I saw Ethan's name light up the screen. She hesitated for 2 long seconds, then pushed herself up from the chair and walked toward the back porch, closing the sliding glass door behind her so their conversation would stay private. I stood alone in the dining room, listening to the low murmur of her voice bleed faintly through the glass. I could not make out exact words, but I heard shifts in her tone, sometimes frustrated, sometimes listening patiently, sometimes sighing deeply. 22 minutes passed before she stepped back inside. The cool autumn air clung to her cardigan. Her face was harder now, less shocked, more guarded. She did not look me directly in the eyes as she crossed back into the room. He says there is far more context I do not know about, she said. He claims the marriage had already been falling apart for a very long time. He says you shut him out, that you stopped trying to work through your problems together. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. Of course that was the version he would hand his mother. He would paint himself as the wounded party, ignore his own affair, shift most of the blame onto my shoulders. That is his story, I replied. I can show you pages of text messages, receipts, everything. But those are just facts. He will spin them however suits him. Diane shook her head slowly. I am not saying you are lying, Lila. I just cannot make up my mind only hearing one side. He is my son. I owe him the chance to tell me what happened from his perspective. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Deep down I had clung to a tiny hope that once she learned the truth, she would stand firmly beside me and the children. Now I understood that would not happen. Blood ran thick for her. She was not ready to discard Ethan just because my reality contradicted his. She told me she planned to meet with him face to face in 2 days during her visit. She wanted to sit down with him alone, without my influence hanging over every word. She would listen to his full account before she took any real position on what should happen next. That night, I lay awake long after Diane had retreated to the guest bedroom and the kids were asleep. The old comfortable balance of this house was gone. The woman under my roof was family, yet I could not trust where her loyalties would land. I had no way to know what lies Ethan would feed her behind closed doors when they sat together. Everything I had built hung partially in the hands of a mother who still wanted to believe her son could not be truly cruel. The morning sun filtered thin and pale through the kitchen windows, stripping the house of every last trace of warm pretense. I sipped cold coffee at the counter, watching Diane move quietly through the living room as she straightened throw pillows and folded the kids' blankets. Her movements were mechanical, distracted, her mind clearly fixed on the upcoming meeting with Ethan. After a sleepless night, I'd let myself stop hoping for easy sympathy. I knew now that if I wanted protection for my kids in my home, I would have to build it myself, one firm boundary at a time. Once Mia and Jax were settled at the dining table with their cereal and cartoon videos, I turned to Diane, my voice steady and unwavering, no longer soft or apologetic. I need to be clear about something while you're here, I said. I'm not stopping you from seeing Ethan. You're his mother, and that's your right. But I won't have this house used as a middle ground for him to pass along excuses, demands, or messages meant to wear me down. Diane paused, her hands freezing mid-fold, a flicker of defensiveness crossing her face. I'm not here to take sides, Lila. I just want to understand. Understanding doesn't require you to relay his request to me, I countered. I pulled my phone from my pocket and laid it on the counter, scrolling through months of saved text threads, late-night conversations, vague apologies, plans he'd canceled last minute, promises he'd never kept. I also pulled up a digital bank statement, highlighting recurring charges to downtown Atlanta restaurants, boutique shops, and a luxury apartment complex I'd never known about. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is months of lies. He drained joint savings to entertain another woman while I paid the mortgage, bought the kids' school supplies, and handled every single household responsibility alone. Diane's eyes lingered on the screen, her neutral expression faltering for the first time since she'd arrived. She'd always known Ethan was lazy, a little self-absorbed, but she'd never allowed herself to believe he was capable of deliberate, prolonged cruelty. Still, she clung to her resolve. I'm still going to meet him. I need to hear his voice, not just read proof on a screen. That's fine, I replied flatly. But when you come back, you don't bring his problems into this home. You don't ask me to compromise. You don't pressure me to work things out, and you don't speak for him. If you can't respect that boundary, your visit to see the kids ends today. The tension in the room spiked instantly. Diane's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, The only sounds were the kids' quiet chatter and the hum of the refrigerator. She clearly hated being forced to choose, resenting me for making her pick between her son and the truth right then and there. But after a long pause, she nodded stiffly. "I'll respect your house rules. I just hope you're not closing the door on reconciliation too quickly." 2 days later, she left early in the morning to meet Ethan at a neutral coffee shop 20 minutes from our neighborhood. I spent the day hyper-aware of every passing minute, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When she returned in the late afternoon, her face was tight and exhausted. No longer confused. Now, conflicted. She didn't need to say a word for me to know exactly what had happened. Ethan had cried victim, blamed our marriage's collapse entirely on me, and begged her to mediate, to convince me to let him come home without consequences. "He says you isolated him," Diane said quietly, leaning against the kitchen wall. "He says you stopped talking to him, stopped being affectionate, made this house cold. He thinks if you both try harder you can fix this." I let out a bitter, tired breath. I stopped trying because I was trying alone for 2 years. I stopped talking because every conversation turned into him dismissing my stress, my exhaustion, my fear that we were drifting apart. He didn't want to fix us. He just wanted to stop feeling guilty for leaving. I looked her straight in the eyes, refusing to back down. "So here's the new rule. From now on, any communication between Ethan and me happens directly. No more middleman. You don't carry his pleas. You don't defend his choices, and you don't ask me to forgive him for hurting your grandkids. If you break that boundary again, our truce is over." Diane stared at me, shocked by my firmness, unused to me standing my ground instead of bending to keep the peace. The fragile, polite truce we'd maintained since her arrival shattered completely in that moment. She was no longer a neutral visitor in my home. She was a divided family member, caught between loyalty to her son and loyalty to the innocent kids he'd abandoned. As night fell, I locked the front door and turned off the living room lights, finally accepting a hard truth. Being gentle and accommodating had only let Ethan hurt us longer. From this day forward, I wasn't going to be the peacekeeper anymore. I was going to be the protector. But in choosing to stand my ground, I'd turned Diane's quiet uncertainty into active resentment, and I had no idea how far that resentment would push her. The boundary I'd set didn't fix the tension in the house. It only froze it in place. Diane stayed quiet and distant for the next 48 hours, polite to the kids but cold toward me. Every glance she shot my way laced with unspoken judgment. She followed my rule of not relaying Ethan's messages, but her silence felt worse than any argument. It was a quiet accusation. "You're being harsh. You're refusing to save this family." Overwhelmed and stretched thin, I turned to the only person who'd always had my back, my best friend, Tess. She'd been texting me daily since Ethan left, checking in, offering to bring meals or watch the kids so I could breathe. Fed up with carrying this weight alone, I finally called her late one evening, once Diane was in the guest room and the kids were asleep. Tess didn't waste any time with small talk. "You need to stop trying to handle this emotionally and start handling it legally," she said firmly, her tone sharp with concern. "Ethan's manipulating his mom to soften you up, and it's working. You need a divorce attorney, custody paperwork, and a clear financial plan before he figures out how to take more from you." Her words were exactly what I needed to hear, but they landed wrong in my exhausted state. I was tired of making hard choices, tired of fighting, tired of everyone telling me what I should do. "It's not that simple," I snapped, my voice cracking with frustration. "You don't live here. You don't have to face Diane every day. You don't have to watch my kids ask where their dad is every night." A long, hurt silence stretched across the line. "I'm not trying to lecture you," Tess said quietly. "I'm trying to keep you from getting destroyed. But if you don't want my help, I'll back off." She hung up before I could apologize, leaving me staring at my dark phone screen, instantly drowning in regret. That small, stupid fight opened a dangerous crack in the only solid support system I had. In the days that followed, Tess texted less frequently, her messages short and guarded, no longer warm and urgent. I knew I'd lashed out unfairly, but my pride kept me from reaching out to fix it immediately. I was already fighting with my marriage, fighting with my mother-in-law, fighting to hold my kids' world together, and I didn't have the energy left to fight for a wounded friendship too. Meanwhile, Diane's quiet bias continued to surface in small, cruel ways. She'd comment on how different the house felt without Ethan, how the kids seemed quieter, how life would be easier if we could just resolve things peacefully. She never outright defended his affair, but she framed his abandonment as a fixable mistake, as if I held all the power to erase the damage he'd done. The final straw came when I found her on the phone with Ethan early one morning, speaking in hushed tones in the backyard. I'd explicitly told her no more relaying messages, but she was doing it anyway, telling him the kids missed him, that I was being stubborn, that there was still hope for reconciliation. When I confronted her, she didn't even apologize. "He's their father," she said firmly. "He deserves to know how his children are doing. You're punishing him by shutting him out completely." "I'm punishing him?" I asked, stunned by her backwards logic. "He left us. He chose another woman over his kids. I'm not shutting him out. I'm refusing to let him use this family whenever it's convenient for him." Our argument stayed quiet for the kids' sake, but the rift between us was now impossible to ignore. By the end of the day, I felt utterly alone. My husband had abandoned me, my mother-in-law was actively siding against me, and my best friend was pulled back and distant. For the first time since Ethan left, I stared at the quiet house at night and wondered if I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. Worse, I realized my own careless anger had cost me the one person who'd always been in my corner, and I had no idea if I could fix it before everything fell apart completely. Diane's last full day of visit arrived with a thick, suffocating tension hanging over every room. She'd stopped trying to hide her frustration with me, and I'd stopped trying to win her over. We existed in the same house as polite strangers, caring for the kids together, but no longer pretending to be family. I'd spent the morning replaying my fight with Tess, drafting and deleting apology texts, too ashamed to send anything that felt inadequate. While I bathed Mia and Jax upstairs that afternoon, Diane stayed downstairs cleaning the kitchen, tidying up loose papers and mail scattered across the dining table. It was a routine, harmless gesture, until she found the stack of old credit card statements I'd set aside to review with a lawyer later that week. I'd printed them out to track every suspicious charge Ethan had made over the past year, planning to use them as proof of his marital financial misconduct. When I came back downstairs with clean, tired kids, Diane was frozen at the table, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the papers in front of her. Her face was pale, all the defensiveness and stubborn loyalty gone, replaced with raw, stunned disbelief. She didn't look up when I walked into the room. "He spent $8,000 on her," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Jewelry, hotel stays, weekend trips, fancy dinners, all while you were paying the mortgage, buying the kids' school clothes, covering every bill alone. He didn't just cheat on you, Lila. He drained this family to spoil another woman." For weeks, Diane had clung to Ethan's narrative, that our marriage was broken beyond repair, that he was a lonely, misunderstood victim with no other choice. But the cold, unarguable numbers on those papers destroyed every lie he told her. This wasn't a desperate reaction to a bad marriage. This was calculated, selfish betrayal. He'd chosen to waste our family's stability on a temporary affair, fully aware of what he was doing. I knelt beside the table, my voice calm but heavy. "I didn't show you these before because I didn't want you to think I was trying to manipulate you. I wanted you to hear him out, like you needed to. But this is the truth. He wasn't unhappy. He was greedy." Diane finally looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. Not anger at me, but shame and heartbreak for the son she'd defended so blindly. "I can't believe he lied to me like this. I can't believe I defended him." In that vulnerable moment, I decided to share the second secret I'd uncovered weeks prior, the one I'd been too terrified to voice aloud. "There's more," I said slowly. "I found emails last week. He's already consulting a family law attorney. He's planning to file for partial custody. He wants scheduled visitation with the kids, but he's refusing to increase his child support payments. He wants access to them whenever he wants, without taking any financial responsibility for their lives." Diane's breath caught in her throat. All this time, she'd believed Ethan just wanted to reconnect with his family, to fix his mistakes. She'd never imagined he was planning to weaponize the kids against me, to use custody as a tool to avoid accountability. "He's not coming back to reconcile," I told her firmly. "He's coming back to take what he wants without sacrificing anything of his new life. He wants to be the fun dad who visits on weekends while I handle all the hard work, all the stress, all the bills." The entire balance of our dynamic shifted in that hour. Diane's blind, lifelong loyalty to her son cracked open irreparably. She didn't argue, didn't make excuses, didn't try to soften his actions anymore. She just sat there staring at the proof of his selfishness, processing the fact that she'd spent weeks judging me harshly, while her own son destroyed our family from the shadows. As night fell, I watched her pack her suitcase slowly, her movements defeated. She was no longer leaving my home frustrated with me. She was leaving heartbroken by her son. But even with the truth finally laid bare, a terrifying question lingered. Would her newfound anger at Ethan be enough to make her stand with me? Or would blood loyalty pull her back to his side once she left this house and faced him alone? Diane left early the next morning, quiet and remorseful, hugging the kids tightly and apologizing to me in a soft, shaky voice before she drove away. For the first time in weeks, the house felt calm, but the peace didn't last long. Less than 48 hours after her departure, everything I'd been holding together crashed down all at once. It started with Tess. After days of radio silence, she finally texted me a short, honest message. I'm still hurt from our fight. I know you're struggling, but I can't keep absorbing your frustration without you letting me back in." My chest ached as I read it. I'd pushed away my best friend when I needed her most, letting my fear and exhaustion ruin the only safe support I had. I typed a long apology, pouring out every ounce of my regret, but she didn't reply right away. For hours I waited for a response that never came, left feeling isolated and abandoned. Then came Ethan. He showed up unannounced at my front driveway just before dinner time, pulling up in his clean new sedan, the car he'd bought with our family money, with no warning, no text, no heads up. I was in the middle of making pasta for the kids when I saw his car pull up through the kitchen window, and my blood ran cold. I stepped outside quickly before he could knock and wake the kids, closing the front door firmly behind me. The autumn wind bit at my cheeks as I faced him, standing in my own driveway, a stranger in the space we'd built together. "You can't be here," I said immediately, my voice tight with alarm. "You don't get to show up unannounced." Ethan's expression was calm, almost cold, practiced and manipulative. "I'm here to see my kids, Lila. I haven't seen them in weeks. You can't keep me from my children." "I'm not keeping you from them," I shot back. "I'm keeping you from disrupting their lives whenever you feel like it. You left. You chose another life. You don't get to waltz back in whenever it's convenient for you." Our argument escalated fast, voices rising in the quiet suburban street. He accused me of alienating him from his family, of punishing him for a mistake, of being bitter and unreasonable. I accused him of abandonment, of financial betrayal, of using our children as leverage to avoid responsibility. He didn't flinch, didn't look guilty, didn't show a single ounce of remorse for the life he'd broken. Desperate for backup, I pulled out my phone and called Tess, hoping she'd answer, hoping she'd come to support me. But the call went straight to voicemail. She was still hurt, still pulling back, and I couldn't blame her. I was alone in this fight. I also texted Diane, begging her to talk some sense into her son, to make him leave. She replied minutes later with a hesitant, conflicted message. "I don't want to make this worse. I don't know what to do." In that moment, I realized the brutal truth. Even after seeing the proof of his betrayal, even after apologizing to me, Diane still couldn't bring herself to confront him. She was too afraid of breaking her bond with her son, too loyal to take a firm stand against him. Ethan stayed on my driveway for 20 agonizing minutes, refusing to leave until I finally threatened to call the local non-emergency police line for trespassing. Only then did he back down, throwing one last sharp remark over his shoulder before he drove away. "This isn't over. I'm going to see my kids, with or without your permission." I stood shaking in my empty driveway long after his car disappeared down the street, the cool wind wrapping around me like a weight. My best friend was distant. My mother-in-law was powerless. My husband was hostile and unyielding. Every layer of support I'd ever relied on was gone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had no one to lean on, no one to validate my pain, no one to help me fight. But in that total, empty low, something shifted inside me. I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I stopped hoping Diane would fix this, stopped begging Tess to stay, stopped praying Ethan would change. If no one was going to stand with me, I would stand alone. I would protect my kids, my home, and my future with everything I had. The last of my naive hope for easy reconciliation died that night, and in its place, unshakable resolve was born. The morning after Ethan's unannounced visit, I woke up different. The fog of grief and exhaustion that had clouded my mind for weeks lifted, replaced by sharp, clear focus. I was done reacting to Ethan's chaos. From that day forward, I would control every part of this fight. I started by booking a formal consultation with a local family law attorney in Atlanta, following the exact steps Tess had urged me to take weeks earlier. I compiled every piece of proof I had, the months of incriminating text messages, the fraudulent credit card charges, the email threads about custody plans, the timestamps of Ethan's missed calls and neglected child support payments. I organized it all into a neat, chronological file, turning scattered evidence into an unbreakable paper trail. Next, I drafted a structured, written visitation schedule. No more unannounced driveway visits, no more last-minute demands, no more emotional manipulation. I laid out clear, fair rules: pre-approved weekend visits, supervised pickup and drop-off times, zero unscheduled contact, formalized child support payment deadlines. I sent the document to Ethan via email, making every term official, documented, and legally binding. Ethan replied within hours, furious and defensive. He called the schedule cruel and restrictive, accused me of weaponizing the kids against him, and insisted he deserved unlimited access to his children. But for the first time, his anger didn't scare me. I knew his outrage came from one simple truth. He could no longer control the narrative. He could no longer show up whenever he wanted, take what he pleased, and leave me to clean up the mess. While I locked down legal boundaries, Diane finally found the courage to confront her son. She called Ethan that afternoon, and for the first time in his life, she didn't defend him, didn't soften his mistakes, didn't make excuses for his selfishness. She laid every truth bare: the stolen family money, the months of lies, his plan to fight for custody without supporting his kids, the pain he'd inflicted on his family. Their phone call turned explosive. Ethan was stunned that his own mother had turned against him, angry that she'd chosen my side over his, furious that her blind loyalty was finally gone. He argued, deflected, and tried to shift blame, but Diane didn't back down. She told him flatly that he had ruined his own marriage, hurt his own children, and lost every right to be pitied. When Diane called me afterward, her voice was shaky but firm. "I was wrong to defend him," she said. "I was wrong to doubt you. I see now exactly who he is." In that moment, she fully, irreversibly switched sides. She was no longer the conflicted mother-in-law balancing loyalty and truth. She was my ally, committed to protecting her grandchildren and holding her son accountable. The balance of power shifted completely that day. For months, Ethan had held all the control. He'd lied freely, manipulated easily, and acted without consequence. Now he faced formal legal boundaries, a documented paper trail, and the loss of his most powerful defender, his own mother. He was no longer the wounded victim in this story. He was the accountable, selfish defendant. But I knew Ethan would never accept this defeat quietly. He'd spent too long getting exactly what he wanted, and the loss of his mother's support, paired with strict legal rules, would push him to retaliate. As I saved the final version of the visitation schedule and sent it to my attorney, I braced myself for his next desperate move. The tide had turned in my favor, but the worst of the fight was still ahead. Ethan's retaliation came faster than I expected. 2 days after I sent the formal visitation terms, he sent a lengthy, aggressive legal email through his personal attorney. His message was calculated and cold, designed to intimidate and overwhelm me. He threatened to file a full custody dispute in county court, claiming I was intentionally alienating him from his children, restricting his parental rights, and creating a hostile home environment for Mia and Jax. It was a blatant bluff, a desperate power play. He had no evidence to support his claims, no proof of poor parenting on my end, only his own wounded pride. But the threat still landed heavy. A public court battle would drag our private family pain into the open, stress out the kids, drain my savings, and stretch this nightmare on for months, maybe years. I almost faltered, almost softened the terms to avoid conflict, until Diane stepped in with a move I never saw coming. She'd spent every day since her fight with Ethan quietly gathering evidence of her own. She'd saved every manipulative text he'd sent her, recorded every dishonest excuse he'd made, and documented every instance of him prioritizing his new relationship over his children. She compiled it all into a comprehensive file and sent it directly to my attorney, offering to testify as a formal witness against her own son. "I know his patterns better than anyone," she told me when she called that night. "I know how he lies, how he twists the truth, how he plays the victim. My testimony will destroy his fake narrative." Buoyed by her support, I finally worked up the courage to fix things with Tess. I sent her a sincere, unreserved apology, owning my exhaustion-driven outburst, admitting I'd taken my pain out on the only person who'd ever loved me unconditionally. To my endless relief, she forgave me instantly. "I just hate seeing you carry this alone," she said. "I'm back. I'm here for every step." With Tess's emotional support and Diane's critical witness evidence, my small team solidified into an unbreakable alliance. We were no longer scattered, isolated, and on the defensive. We were organized, prepared, and ready to fight on equal ground. Ethan quickly realized his bluff had failed. His threat of a messy public court battle no longer terrified me, because I now had proof, witnesses, and legal structure on my side. Desperate to regain control, he played his final card. He claimed he'd been unfairly judged and demanded a mandatory mediation meeting at my attorney's office, insisting he would only settle terms in a formal, neutral setting. It was his last attempt to regain power, his final shot at manipulating the outcome in his favor. But this time I saw every move coming. I knew the mediation would be our final, decisive showdown, the moment where all his lies would collapse, all his threats would fall flat, and all his selfish choices would finally catch up to him. The days leading up to the meeting were tense and quiet. I prepared endlessly, reviewed every document, practiced every response, and leaned on my newfound strength. The power balance had fully reversed. Ethan was no longer the one dictating the rules. I was. And when we walked into that mediation room, I was ready to win. The mediation room at the Atlanta Family Law Office was sterile and quiet. with plain gray walls, a long wooden conference table, and zero warmth. It was the perfect setting for the final unemotional reckoning of my broken marriage. I arrived early with my attorney, Tess by my side for quiet support, and Diane right behind us, ready to testify. When Ethan walked in minutes later, alone and tense, I barely recognized him. He looked defensive, worn out, and uncharacteristically uncertain. As soon as the mediator opened the floor for discussion, Ethan launched straight into his rehearsed narrative. He painted me as rigid and unforgiving, claimed I'd shut him out of the marriage long before his affair, insisted he was a devoted father being unfairly punished for a single mistake. He spoke smoothly, confidently, repeating every lie he'd told for months, trying to frame himself as the victim of my bitterness. I let him finish, letting his false story hang in the air before my attorney began presenting our evidence. We laid out the credit card statements, the months of hidden spending, the abandoned household responsibilities, the emails proving he'd planned custody disputes to avoid financial support. But the moment that broke his entire narrative was Diane's testimony. She sat straight in her chair, calm and unwavering, and told the full, unfiltered truth. She spoke of Ethan's endless manipulation, his deliberate lies to his own mother, his disregard for his children's stability, and his selfish choice to drain family funds for his affair. She confirmed that he'd spent weeks twisting reality to gain sympathy, that he'd never once prioritized his kids over his new relationship, and that his claims of being locked out of the marriage were completely fabricated. Ethan's composure shattered instantly. He tried to interrupt, to argue, to dismiss his mother's words as biased resentment, but the mediator shut him down firmly. There was no refuting her testimony. No one knew his character, his patterns, and his flaws better than the woman who'd raised him. His carefully constructed victim persona crumbled completely, leaving only the truth exposed. He was a selfish, irresponsible father and husband who'd abandoned his family by choice. Faced with overwhelming evidence and damning witness testimony, Ethan had no room left to negotiate. He was forced to accept fair, legally binding terms: structured, supervised weekend visitation, full and timely child support payments covering all school, medical and childcare expenses, and a formal division of marital assets that honored the financial damage he'd caused. The core conflict of our entire story reached its decisive end in that room. Ethan's months of manipulation, threats, and lies were fully defeated. He could no longer control me, intimidate me, or weaponize our children to avoid accountability. But as I signed the final mediation papers, relief wasn't the only emotion I felt. There was a quiet, heavy grief too. This was the official end of the marriage I'd dedicated a decade of my life to. The end of the family dream I'd cherished for years. The battle was won, but the scars of the fight would remain. And as I looked across the table at a defeated, bitter Ethan, I knew one final truth. The legal resolution was final, but the real healing was only just beginning. Months of quiet, steady healing passed after the mediation. The sharp, daily chaos of conflict faded into calm, routine stability. The kids adjusted slowly but surely to our new normal. Predictable school days, consistent bedtime routines, no more sudden disruptions, no more confusing fights between their parents. They stopped asking every day when their dad would come home and started settling happily into our quiet, peaceful life together. Ethan abided by the mediated terms, showing up for scheduled visitation and paying child support on time. But he remained distant and disconnected. He never showed up early, never stayed late, never asked about the kids' school projects or soccer games. He fulfilled his legal obligations, but he never repaired the emotional bond he'd broken. It was clear he'd chosen his new life, and he would never fully return to the family he'd abandoned. Diane's role in our lives settled into something gentle and honest. She visited regularly, not to mediate conflict or defend anyone, but purely to love her grandchildren. She no longer made excuses for Ethan, no longer tried to fix the past, no longer carried the weight of her son's mistakes. She loved my kids fiercely, supported me unconditionally, and built a quiet, genuine relationship with our little family, one rooted in truth, not pretense. Tess and I grew closer than ever after our reconciliation. She became my constant support, helping me navigate refinancing the house to remove Ethan's name from the mortgage, celebrating small wins with me, and sitting with me through hard, lonely nights when grief resurfaced. My friendship, once cracked and fragile, was now stronger and more authentic than it had ever been. Slowly, I rebuilt my own identity. For years, I defined myself entirely as a wife and mother, tying my self-worth to the stability of my marriage. Now I learned to value myself independently. I took small steps forward. I reconnected with old hobbies, started taking weekend morning walks alone, and stopped apologizing for prioritizing my peace and my kids' safety. I let go of the woman who'd spent years bending and compromising to keep a broken family intact, and embraced the stronger, braver version of myself who'd fought to save us. On a quiet late autumn afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after Diane first walked through my front door, and discovered her son's betrayal, she visited again. The porch light glowed warm, the kids laughed loudly in the playroom, and the house felt calm and whole in a way it never had when Ethan lived here. There were no secrets, no tense silences, no fake smiles to hide brokenness. Everything was honest, steady, and real. I stood in the kitchen, watching Diane hug Mia and Jax tight, and I thought back to that devastating first day. I'd started this story terrified, alone, and desperate to save a marriage that was already beyond repair. I'd ended it free, grounded, and grateful for the quiet, perfect stability I'd built for my children. The old life was gone forever. It had died the day Ethan walked out, the day the truth came to light. The day I stopped waiting for someone else to fix my future. In its place, I'd built something better. A life rooted in self-respect, safe boundaries, loyal love, and unshakable strength. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale ending. It was real, hard-won peace. And for the first time in a very long time, I was finally home.